Great Monday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing really well, King. It's good to be here, as always, on a Monday morning with you.
Same here. Same here. So, what's your spiritual energy level?
It's a 10. I had to choose it a little bit this morning because it's cold and damp after some beautiful, felt like late summer weather the past few days here. And it was rainy and cold yesterday, and it's rainy and cold again today. So I admit to being affected by the weather. So I chose a 10 despite my body feeling differently.
Oh, great. Great. Just for clarification, when you say cold, does it require you to wear a coat or a jacket outside?
It's a jacket. I mean, I would go out with a fleece and then a rain jacket on top of it. So I'll go out with 3 layers now. It's in the 40s, and I'm a lightweight when it comes to the cold. I don't I don't have a lot of padding on top of my head or on my under my skin. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm a 10 as well. And, like you, I choose that. I choose that number every day, primarily because the engineer and me don't see any value in choosing a lesser number. And like I said, for me, which rolls right into my gratitude moment, life, health, the ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, and breathe is always going to put me at a 10. Because in the morning, I wake up and can't do those things, then I have to question whether I want to be a 10. But the fact that I can get up and be healthy and not have any major pains preventing me or prohibiting me from being able to walk or do my normal daily activities for the day, I'm always going to be at a 10. And with that being said, the rest of my gratitude is just being happy for a mother who's alive, a mother who's of sound mind, still a kind spirit, of love in her heart, of having the opportunity to pursue my purpose in life, also for the challenges in my life as I continue to learn to resolve those challenges. I love the growth that I'm experiencing. And I tell you, man, I don't know if you experienced this at 50, but now I'm at 54, and I have this belief that you really don't become that decade until about the middle. So even when you have to be about 54, 55 to 56 to really experience the 50s. That's same thing for every decade, because when you become 51, you really don't know much. It's like being an infant to it. When you get to be middle age of that decade, then you really learn how to navigate around that number now. And one thing I'm really learning about being 50 is just how much I love learning. And I don't know, maybe I didn't pay attention to it as much when I was younger, but I just tell you, when I grab something new and it's something that profoundly is like, wow, I just love it. I love the fact that I don't take it for granted. I love that I can comprehend it. And I love that I just appreciate the fact that I'm getting more of this kind of information, whatever the information may be. And so then finally, I'm grateful for another opportunity to do this show with you and the infinite possibilities that this day is going to bring me. So that's my gratitude.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll just comment quickly on the early and mid 50s to use that example. So I created a system in my head years ago where from 0 to 3 is the early. So 50, 51, 52 would be the early. And then from 4, 5, and 6 are the mid. And then 7, 8, and 9 are the late. So like it works mathematically if you look at the numbers. But I agree with you. I mean, once you're in that 54, 55, 56, or 34, 35, 36, whatever it is, you kind of get a better sense for that decade. So I agree. So my gratitude is, as usual, I have just really grateful for indoor plumbing, especially the hot water piece. The opportunity to open up a refrigerator and find food. In fact, yesterday I had to drive about 140 miles total, but I was driving about 70 miles back from Ossining, New York. Yesterday I went to a book presentation for a friend of mine. And it was raining. It was cold. I have old eyes. So driving back was tough. And I was hungry. I hadn't had dinner.
Wow.
And I stopped to get gas at a 7-Eleven Sonic place. And I walked in. And they had all these hamburgers and hot dogs and all this really bad food. I was starving. It smelled so good. And I thought I was going to get something, and I just couldn't do it. I didn't want to put that stuff into my body because I try to take care of it. And I've eaten, fast food years ago. I mean, I wasn't immune to it. But I'm just so grateful that yesterday I was able to wait another hour, get home, eat something light that was more or less healthy, and not put that stuff. So just to have those options, to see a guy present a book, guy that I like a lot. His book is called Warrior Compassion. His name is Steve Harvey. Really good guy, works with law enforcement and military veterans and active duty on dealing with how to be vulnerable and compassionate as a man, doing some great work. But to be able to do that, not eat the bad food, get home and have something that was more or less healthy before I went to bed, that's a privilege. I mean, the electricity, then I turned, the heat came on last night because it was cold in the house. All of that is just, I have a deep level of gratitude for it. And then to echo, your words, I have, as far as I can tell, still a moderately sound mind. My body seems to work reasonably well. And I'm deeply grateful for all of that. And just the ability to get up in the morning and do this on a Monday morning with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, interesting story. Glad you made it there and back safely. And, 70 miles, a long way to drive for a friend. So, definitely appreciate that investment of time, energy in doing that. And especially if it's cold and rainy as well. So glad to hear you back, see you back as well. So with that being said, what's the walk us into our topic for today?
Yeah, so we're speaking about healing America's narratives, the feminine, the masculine, and our collective national shadow. And that's my book, which came out in September of 2022. And the previous 2 weeks, we've been speaking about this developmental worldview, this us-centric or group-centric worldview, which is where we can grow to after me-centrism or egocentrism. But this us-centric worldview is where a majority of the people on the planet, many people on the planet, kind of live. And it's the worldview where most of the power resides. So it's us against them, whether it's nation versus nation, whether it's terrorists versus nation state, whether it's in the United States now, Republican versus Democrat, or liberal versus conservative. And what happens in this us-centric view is we lose sight of anything bigger. So a great example of it, there was an article in Friday's New York Times about Michael Johnson, who was elected the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the United States Congress. The Republican House elected Kevin McCarthy. Then they decided to get rid of him. And then through about 3 votes, they couldn't elect somebody else. They couldn't find somebody else. They rejected Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise. And finally, they nominated and elected this guy, Michael Johnson. So I want to speak less about him. I will say a little bit about him, but more about how both the conservatives, the Republicans now, and the Democrats, more liberal, in Congress use his story. They kind of weaponize his story. And part of it, from what he has said, it's not like he doesn't deserve it. He was an election denier. Politically, he's in a very different place than I am. He doesn't believe in equal rights for gays and lesbians and non-binary people and trans people. He doesn't consider them equally human. He doesn't believe in a woman's right to choose to have an abortion. So ideologically, I don't agree with a lot of how he stands and what he stands for. But he and his wife, who are, if they're not evangelical Christians, they're deeply Christian. And they brought a young black man into their house. They have 4 biological children. When he was 14 years old, he's now out of the house. He's married. I think he's probably in his late 30s. And they never adopted him, but they got custody of him. And then I haven't found out exactly what that meant. And, it seemed like they did a good thing. He was a kid who was in trouble. But I want to read a little bit about what is going on in Congress now, based on some of the things that Michael Johnson has said about bringing this young man. I don't even want to say his name because he has asked for privacy. So we don't even know what if he took the Johnson's last name, and I want to respect that, but I want to point to this us-centric view between the liberals and the conservatives. So in the past, and this is again quoting from the New York Times article, he has described his son as, quote, a success story and compared it to the movie The Blind Side, where a wealthy white family took in an impoverished black teenager who became a football star, actually based on a true story. But he has used his son in a conversation in the subcommittee on the Judiciary Committee in the House. He said that his son opposed reparations because it defied, quote, an important tradition of self-reliance. So he used his, quote unquote, son, this young man he had never adopted but took into his house, used his opinion on reparations to kind of bolster his own. Now, I'm not taking a stance on reparations or against them. I'm just pointing to what Johnson has done because he helped raise a young black man. When other lawmakers in Congress who are black, and that means they're Democrats because they're virtually, I don't know if there are any black representatives. There are very few in the House of Representatives. They referred to Michael Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, as, quote, a Trump-backed extremist who wants to criminalize abortion and cut programs like Social Security and Medicare. Right? And that's based on his record of votes and public statements he has made. When George Floyd was killed, and I'm going to quote again, Michael Johnson described the killing as an act of murder. And he said he had the authority to say something like that because he learned firsthand about racial disparities from raising a black son. So he referred to George Floyd's killing as an act of murder. When he said that out loud, he was criticized from the right, who felt that he was taking the side of the Black Lives Matter movement, because he did say it was an act of murder. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't anything. So he took that stance, was criticized from the right. When he spoke about his Caucasian son, his biological son, and this young man that he took in, who was black, having different challenges and saying that his biological son had an easier path, the people on the right in the House of Representatives criticized him because that sounded like an acknowledgement of systemic racism. When he said generally the young black man he took in had a harder path than his white son. So I'm not going to keep it. I could go on and on and on. The point I'm trying to make is that both sides, take, in this case, Michael Johnson's choice to bring a young black man into his home, raise him, and then make comments based on his having done that. Both sides weaponize that according to their own needs and desires and beliefs. And that's at the heart of the dysfunction in this country right now. And this one happens to be about the Speaker of the House and race, but it goes on across virtually every issue. And no longer do we have conversations about where we stand on a given issue, but we demonize the other side and say that they're un-American or not American. So I just want to, that's a kind of a long introduction into it, but I'm curious to what comes up for you with that.
Well, several things. Number one, what I really found to be interesting is that nowadays, and it's been like this, I would say, since maybe Reagan, but it's gotten worse every 4 years, where identity politics has just really become the norm, and it's an accepted way of thinking and acting. That Republicans have to believe and be all in on this particular thought process and this ideology, and Democrats have to be all in on this, on another one. And we get someone like Mike Johnson, who has he comes as a pattern interrupt, because here you have a white man who is Christian and generally conservative in his thinking, in his beliefs, in his policies, but then has a black son, and the black son forces him to have to look at things with a different lens in order to communicate with them. He's forced to have those kind of conversations that other white people with that same ideology wouldn't have to have. They could just sit back and just read and get their perspective off what they see on TV and what's painted by whatever news source or information source they choose to allow to come into their head, where he's forced to have a conversation with someone who's experiencing it from a different lens, like the George Floyd. So it's interesting to hear how it's not surprising that Congress on both sides is using him kind of as their political football, so to speak, to say, okay, well, we're going to use him based on what he said here, and they're going to say, well, Republicans are going to say what they're going to say. But what I really find interesting is this, and I just want to speak on this on reparations, that where I think a lot of people get reparations wrong is really what should be the intent behind reparations. This is where I really fault the leadership in the Black community that talks about reparations. See, to me, reparations should not be a monetary value, because then you debate whether or not it's going to take away a person's ability to be hardworking, and if it's a monetary gift and you didn't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which is crap. No one pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. My whole things I've learned, and even my company, is all about connections. You have the right connections, and you get the right introductions. That's what's going to really propel or give sustainability in your life. No one pulls themselves up by their bootstraps. But if you look at it from what it should be intended to do, from the logic of the Native Americans, it should be something that's meant to be generationally change the trajectory of the Black race going forward, not to just give current Blacks a monetary gift for what the ancestors did, but it should be something that changes the race forever going forward. And just money won't do that, because money can be spent in one generation, then the next generation won't see any value of it at all. I think it should be something like healthcare, free healthcare, or free education. So those things will change forever. And then you can't say, well, I don't think most people fight those things, but not to get into a conversation about reparations. But I just want to point that out. So when he said his son says he doesn't believe in it, I can see how a person might say, I don't want it personally, a monetary gift, because I don't want to work hard. And I've now, through this privileged white environment that I'm growing up in, I no longer feel like a victim, because doors have been open for me. I'm sure that he has connections now and opportunities that he wouldn't get if he had been raised in the inner city by Black parents. So it's easier for him and understandable for him to say, well, I don't want monetary reparations. So I can understand that perspective. I don't necessarily agree with him only looking at it from his perspective. That's what I think the whole reparations argument is. I think it's a very selfish argument for the folks who are pro and con, if they're looking at it strictly from the money side of it. But I sum up by saying this, that's what really makes the Speaker of the House really an interesting person, because what it really shows me at the end of the day is that regardless of a person's ideology and the way they've been raised, if they get the opportunity to be exposed or to meet someone else from a marginalized class and truly have a conversation with them with the intent to learn, listen, as the 7 habits of highly effective people say, listen to understand, seek to understand before being understood. If you do it with that purpose, with that intentionality, you're going to learn something. It's going to change your perspective because most people's perspectives are painted in what they know and what they've experienced. And so if you're black and you've never been around white people and you've grown up in the inner city, you've only gone to black schools and all the information you read of black news articles and you watch listen to black radio and black media, then you're going to have a certain thought about white people. You just can't avoid that. Same thing with a white person. They grew up in Christian, conservative, white area that's not too many black people. The only time you see black people is in the news or been arrested or whatever, very small interactions with black folks. You're going to have a certain bias. That's why I believe everybody is prejudiced to a certain extent, because you're prejudging, which is the definition of what prejudice is. So you have a certain bias until you learn to communicate with somebody, and you learn. Like, oh, okay. I was biased to a certain extent with gay men until I began living in Tacoma Park, had a gay mayor. I started to meet more and more gay men. I started listening to them. And I started listening and seeing the humanity in them, as opposed to labeling them as a gay person. I saw the human being before me who just happens to be gay. And it began to change my perspective and my bias. And that same thing with anyone any marginalized class that I meet, or anyone who's different than me from a physical appearance. And that's why I love what you're doing, and with the fully human connection work that you're building on. It's because that's so important that you have to begin to see people as human beings. And when you do, biases begin to go away. And then you see the difference that they bring is something that's interesting now. It's like a new food group to me.
Yeah.
Say, oh, here's Greek food. Okay, well, let me try that. There's a different dish, different spice, prepared a different way. It's still a salad, but this is Greek salad as opposed to American salad, as opposed to Thai salad. At the end of the day, it's how it's prepared. It gives a different flavor, but at the same time, it's salad at the end of the day. We're all human beings. We got to learn how to be together. And that just, like I said, politics-wise, both sides are going to use them, try to paint a picture of them for their own agenda. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays itself out.
Yeah. So I really appreciate your zeroing in there on what the word and the concept reparations really means. Because, and you referred to Native Americans, and the Lakota Sioux were granted a settlement. I forget if the Supreme Court found in favor of them. It was in the 1980s, I think, but it was for the United States federal government breaking the treaty that gave them basically was called the Great Sioux Reservation. I forget how many millions of acres it was. And gradually over a period of time, when there was gold discovered or more settlers wanted to go in, the government let them do it. And so the initial settlement was something in the vicinity of, there was this, I forget the number now, it was either like $17 million or $75 million. And the Lakotas, and that was in reparations for having violated the treaty. And that money is still accruing interest. The Lakota Sioux Nation has never taken it. So it's worth over $1 billion now. And the basic perspective was, and it's this whole different way of viewing the world. They basically said, what are we going to do? Divide it up with all of the members of our nation and give them all X numbers of dollars? And, because they have problems with alcoholism, they have problems with unemployment. So the money just given, the leaders of the community were wise enough to say, that's not going to resolve what needs to be resolved here. They said, we don't want your money. We want our land back. So that, and that just stops the government in its track, because they don't know what to do with that. That's a valid thing to say. Is it realistic in terms of it happening? Probably not. But I want to just go a little bit deeper with that. And they've even said, don't get us wrong, we're not looking to take away the homes of some white people who live on what used to be ours now. They didn't take our land away. They didn't violate any treaties. We don't want to do that, but we want some kind of a respect, some kind of an admission of what was done that money can't give us. So again, and I'm really greatly reducing their arguments. So I'm just doing this from memory now. But to your point, okay, so I'm a descendant of a slave. My family was enslaved. So whatever the number is going to be, here's some money, and we're done. And that's it's not going to do it. We know that. I mean, most anybody who was really serious about it, not to say that somebody couldn't be helped, but as you said, wow, access to quality education, access to healthcare, just to continue to correct the disparities and the horrors that were perpetrated, during the enslavement of Africans and then subsequently of African American people. So I really, all that to say is I'm glad you just zeroed in on the idea of reparations as you began. I just want to take a moment, something that I've done this several times. I typically do it every couple of weeks in case somebody's not familiar with what we mean by group-centrism. For over 50 years now, researchers have studied adult development, and there are numerous models of how adults can develop throughout their lives. It doesn't stop at any point unless you choose to stop it, but you have to choose to develop. It's not magic. It's not like what happens physiologically and psychologically between birth and around the age of 18. If you're more or less healthy and fed and somebody loves you, development takes place between birth and 18 or 19 or 20. It's not automatic after that. And what we've been talking about has been this shorthand that I use in the book. So really briefly, and all of these are healthy and can become unhealthy. So there's a me-centric worldview or egocentric. It's all about me. And that's necessary to grow up in our early childhood years like that, because that's how we individuate ourselves and recognize that we have to be responsible, and we're responsible and accountable for our behaviors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing wrong with that. If you're still me-centric when you're 32, problematic. I just picked that number randomly. If you develop, you begin to identify more with a group. Typically, if you're healthy and fortunate, it's your family of origin. But a group-centric worldview can be family of origin. It can be your best friend. There's two people. It can be your religion. Okay. It can be your dismissal of religion. If you consider yourself an atheist, you have this group of all the other atheists. It can be your political party. It can be your nation. It can be your ethnicity. It can be anything. So I identify with these different groups. Nothing wrong with that. All right. Because as you like to say, it's in connection with other people, with our tribes and groups, that we really can grow and flourish and get a lot of things done. But when the groups become us against them, or us, other than them, as opposed to us with them, then they become unhealthy. And most of the power structures, financial, military, et cetera, in the world today, are grounded in an us-centric view. And they're competing. They want to beat the competition. And it leads to war. It leads to disparities in wealth. It leads to a lot of bad things. It leads to dysfunction in government. We've seen that. So the next movement, and this is the one you were speaking about, when you just see the human being, you don't see their sexual orientation or their sexual identity or their skin pigmentation or their whatever. And when I say you don't see it, I don't mean you make believe you don't notice what color somebody's skin is. I don't mean that, but that's not the essence of the person that you're experiencing. And that's the next developmental move. After us centrism, it's all of us centrism or human centric. Oh, that Chinese person, okay, or that person from Ghana, or that person from Peru, or that person from Spain, or from Texas. Another human. I did that as a joke. All the countries and then Texas. Sorry, all my friends in Texas. Oh, just another human being, just like me. Different costume, maybe different size, different shape, whatever, but another human being. And that's where I want to relate to that person, not based on their beliefs necessarily or how they appear. And then the last step, so human centric is the third of four. And the last step is cosmos or all of us, all of it centric. In other words, I'm part of the universe. I'm a child of the stars. And we all really are. If you understand what happened with the Big Bang and all of the hydrogen and oxygen and all of that stuff that, that produced giraffes, it produced you, it produced me, it produced the books behind me. So we all really belong there, as does every worm, rattlesnake, dolphin, and saber-toothed tiger, and oak tree. If you identify there, you're really cautious around what you do with the waste that you produce, how you live your life, because you don't want to do damage to something that you're identified with. So again, me-centric, us-centric, all of us-centric, and all that is centric. That's a 4-step shorthand for some developmental models that are based in research that are much more granular and much more nuanced. But that's an accurate assessment that we can use in speaking about our day-to-day lives. So what we're speaking about, again, is the problem with this us-centric view that pits one group against the other. And, and in Congress, it's not even one group. It's more like 4 groups. It's far right. It's 5 groups. Let's just say it this way. Far right, middle right, middle left, far left. And they're all contentious. Even within the left or within the right, there's contention. And they don't do a really good job managing it. Some do better than others, but it's pretty messy there now. Last thing I'll say is I always tune into who is speaking, whether it's an individual or a group, whose platform or agenda is about including all Americans in America. And just for now, we'll stay in America, not go out to the whole globe. That gets more complex. And who is speaking about excluding some. All right? Because the founding fathers excluded some. They gave us some great documents, and with their own cultural givens, they gave us this possibility toward growing toward a more perfect union. But if you were the local white blacksmith or carpenter when the Declaration of Independence was signed and when the Constitution was ratified, you weren't included in all men are created equal. And I used white carpenter or blacksmith as a specific example because obviously women weren't included, slaves weren't included, enslaved Africans weren't included, and Native Americans weren't included. Those are the obvious exclusions. But it wasn't, it was basically white, educated, land-owning men who were the men that were created equal in the views of our founding fathers. Now, in fairness to them, that was a bit of a compromise because they had to exclude certain people in order to get all of the states to sign on. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, but that's, accurate. Nowadays, there are factions in the United States government who are still trying to exclude specific groups of American people. That's the problem that we're pointing to here. So I know I went on there for a bit, but I'll stop.
Well, I mean, you gave a lot of great information. I definitely think it's important to understand the centric, whether it's the me or the us or the we, and then, as you say, the cosmic centric. And I like to look at going back to, again, the identity, how you see yourself initially. You ask a person, when I first meet them, most people ask, who are you? I like to ask, what's your purpose? Right? Because that throws them off a little bit. Now, the people who are in tune who are aligned, who have a purpose, rattle it off. Just like, yeah, my purpose is such and such. But the person who really hasn't tuned in to their purpose in life, they're gonna have to pause for a minute and then think about it. Mm-hmm. And make sure they really give a good answer, because you don't want to just throw anything out there arbitrarily. My purpose is to, make a lot of money. And it's like, oh, how this person's going to view me now, And I asked that question because that, to me, determines from my perspective whether or not you're worth any more investment of time, regardless of your skin color, regardless of your race, regardless of your sexual orientation, your religion, your politics, or whatever it may be. If you don't have a purpose, or your purpose is not aligned with mine, diametrically opposed, like you say, my purpose is to get rich, and that's your purpose. And I know that right there. In addition to that, what you're looking to do is get rich at the expense of others. And more likely, you're not going to care how you get rich and who you hurt or harm or what you do to the planet on that pathway of becoming rich. Mm-hmm. So, now again, that's a lot of assumptions I'm making based on that. But to me, that's what we have to do when we meet people. We have to look at whether or not we have to quickly discern whether you're worth inviting into my space, allowing your energy to come in to connect with mine. And that's where we have to really be, and to me, at this time and space, because I mentioned that and I went in a direction because every day I'm seeing examples of people who mistakenly continue to connect with people with whom they have things in common with. And that I've learned that nothing can be more disastrous than that on every level. We can say, okay, you and I we could have met in Japan, and our Japanese connections or associates could say, I really want you to meet this guy named Reggie. He's another American. You all have that in common. And then you and I meet, and then, okay, wow, he's white, he's Italian. I wasn't expecting that. So all the other biases that I have in my mind, if I judge you just on that physical or that label or those labels, are going to just not fill my head with every other. Now you're associated with every other white Italian man that's in his 60s that I've ever heard about or ever read about. And I'm not seeing Reggie the human being yet. And that can be a big mistake. And that's where I'm going with, because politically, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people continue to double down on their politics. Like, okay, well, like Republicans were so tolerant of themselves. I'm talking about not the congressional folks. I'm talking about Republican-minded voters of their party with regards to how long it took for them to finally elect a speaker. Now, again, you were to flip that, and it was the Democrats that had those issues. The Republicans would have been annihilating Democrats on a daily basis on how dysfunctional they are, how they can't sit here and govern, how they shouldn't be allowed to. It's all Biden's fault. We got all that rhetoric, all that would have been in the dominant news. And of course, that's what the Democrats said. I would have said that if I was a Republican, and I'm not a Democrat, I would have called out my party for that. I didn't really hear too many Republicans when I'm talking about Republicans, I'm speaking of those who I watch on podcasts and hear on news channels who consistently give out conservative views as though they're unbiased and they're justified in their views, because of the fact is the Democrats just always wrong. And it's like, how can you never see the hypocrisy in your own party, the issues with your own party, how you never call them out? Same thing with Democrats. They never call out their own party at all. Their party can never do anything wrong. And that to me is where, when you identify with that group and you become that group-centric you talk about, that's where it begins to, I believe, chip away at your core soul spirit as a human being. When you allow your group-centric to now clog your thought process or cloud your thought process to the point where you're not even thinking along the lines of justice anymore, along the lines of love anymore. You're thinking along the lines of what's in the best interest of us. And if it's in the best interest of us, regardless of who it hurts, regardless of what it destroys, but lifts up us, that's all I care about, then to me, as you talked about earlier, that growth dynamic is not happening. You're not growing as a human being. And that to me is where I think most people who I want to connect with, and I would hope that most people who get to the point where, as we talk about, Carl Jung talks about the different archetypes, that when you get to the point of your spirit, you want to be that spirit archetype where you're saying, I want to be the best human being that I possibly can. I want to be fully human. I want to engage into that kind of ideology. And whatever that entails, from learning about myself on a daily basis, how I could be a better listener, how I could be a better server. I had a conversation with a woman the other day who I was going to interview for my podcast. And this is a woman who, MIT grad, I'm not going to say her name, but she's an MIT grad. She's an author of several books. She's a business consultant. And I mentioned to her about alignment. And I said, well, I really love to connect with servant leaders. And she said, well, I just want to caution you on the word servant, because I don't like that word, And she explained, I was like, wow, what is she going with this? And she explained that she was Greek and her people were enslaved, and she felt servant being lesser than someone else. That's how she took it. And I explained, no, I meant servant as being of service to someone, and understanding as a leader, your role is to serve. And when I explained to her in that context, she said, well, yes, I see alignment. But see, I only mentioned that because she was willing to listen to get a better understanding instead of just tuning me out right there and just doubling down like, oh, you said servant. I don't want to talk to anybody who's now saying I should be a servant. And she could have really went in that direction. And that's what they do on a lot of these political shows. They find that one little thread, so to speak, if you use an analogy of a sweater. I see a thread there. I'm just going to pull that. I'm going to just keep pulling that. I'm not going to listen to you try to explain to me that I shouldn't pull it. I'm just going to pull it. And that's what we got to get beyond. And to me, when I hear a politician, whether they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, they begin to talk that language of how we need to be more fully human. That's the one I want to really begin to listen to more, and then probably put my support behind, because that's when I believe that even though we might not agree on every issue on day one, I believe that they have growth and be willing to maybe alter and change their position. Last thing I want to say on this point is, I forgot, it was a congressman from, I believe, was it the last shooting that just happened? Was that Maine or?
Maine, yeah.
Yeah, it was a congressman from Maine who said that he was prior to the shooting, he was pro all guns, but now he had to question that now as a result of the last shooting. So that's showing growth, even though it has to come up as a form of tragedy in order for him to grow. Yet still, he's showing growth because now he's willing to ban assault rifles as a result of the last shooting. And that's all I'm saying. What does it take for folks to finally wake up and realize that tying myself to this group dynamic is not only not healthy for me, but it's not healthy for the greater good?
Yeah, I mean, there was so much rich content in what you just said. I want to just say a little bit about two things and see where that takes us. It might take us, close to the end, but the last thing you said with regard to the congressman, and I forget his name, but I did see his and listen to his interview. And that's really an interesting one, because one of the most striking things I heard on that very issue, this goes back post Sandy Hook, so it was after Sandy Hook. Remember that Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was shot in the head outside of a supermarket in Arizona. I think it was in Tucson, where she was I think she was campaigning for her next term when she was shot, and several people were killed. She survived. And her husband, whose name I forget, who's now a senator, he was an astronaut. He was in the Navy, and he was an astronaut, and then he's now a U.S. senator. And they both were gun owners and members of the NRA before she was shot. And they stayed gun owners and members of the NRA after she was shot. And they actually said publicly that even though it happened to them, like she was shot in the head, they said it wasn't until Sandy Hook, when the young children, 26-year-olds plus 6 educators were killed, that they really did their due diligence and came over to the side of advocacy for getting rid of the assault weapons. And I don't know where they stand exactly now, but it took her getting shot and then Sandy Hook for them to move away from their group collaboration with the NRA. So here's where I want to go with that. Why it almost seems like everybody, this is going to be a kind of a grandiose statement, a little bit of hyperbole, but there seems to be some evidence of it. It almost seems as though everyone who fights to keep assault weapons in the hands of average Americans, that includes the Supreme Court, all right? It almost seems like they have to have a personal tragedy in order to understand. No, that's not true for every single one, but it seems that way. I mean, God bless this guy from Maine. I agree with you. That was growth. But did it take a mass shooting in your home state? It didn't count when it happened in Sandy Hook or Littleton, Colorado, or, there were too many. I can't name them all anymore. I used to be able to name them. Can't do it. So that's one point, to your point around, his mentioning that. The second piece is about, people in a given political party being able to stand up and say, no, we're wrong. We're doing this. We shouldn't be doing this. So I want to just name, just go back briefly to Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, who not only did they push back against their party, but they sat on the January 6th committee, and Liz Cheney was a leader of that committee. And both of them have said, as has outgoing Senator Mitt Romney from Utah. Now we're talking about a senator, but all of them have said that privately, other Republican senators and other Republican representatives don't support the MAGA Trump movement, but they're afraid that if they stand up for their beliefs, they'll never win another election. And that's a valid, number one, it's a valid fear, because the party itself, Donald Trump, will attack them for sure. And they might not get funding from the same people they typically get funding from. So that's a valid fear on one point. The other point is they're basically admitting that they're not willing to tell the truth about where they stand, to have the courage to do that and the integrity to do that in a really frightening time in our nation's history. So we have elected officials who neither have integrity nor courage, because privately they admit where they stand, but they won't make a public stand. They're afraid of the fringes. And when I say fringes, I mean the MAGA Republican presence in Congress and Donald Trump. Because he's an example, and I'll bring this to a close now. He's an example of someone who lives in a me-centric world. He always has. There's no evidence he cares about anybody. He lived most of his life with fairly just left of center views, except when it came to taxes. And he has used the Republican Party toward his own end because he knew that there was not a snowball's chance in hell that he could use the Democratic Party to get where he got. There's no way he could have done and I'm not saying the Democrats are great and Republicans are bad, but he could not have done that with the current Democratic Party back in 2014, 2015, 2016. It would not have happened. But he saw the opportunity, and he's an opportunist, and he took it, and it worked. And he's simply using a group for his own ego, me-centric purposes. And unfortunately, his followers don't seem to understand that. So again, my opinion, but anybody wants to challenge that, I can back it up.
No, I think you're spot on with your opinion. I mean, because again, he's speaking to his followers' pain. Now he's not resolving their pain, but he's saying, "I see you, I hear you, and I'm gonna amplify what you're dealing with because no one else is, and that's enough for them." Why you say he continues to look at things for his own agenda, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I believe that if he could have been Democrat and let the Democratic Party out that way, they would have. But I believe, my personal belief, I think you and I may disagree with this. The only reason I see the Democratic Party not going with it is because of the hatred and division he has spewed. The Democratic Party has to be more inclusive of because of who the party is composed of, so they wouldn't be able to go down that road with him. But the Republicans were able to sit here and say, well, we're not getting too many of those individuals, whatever that marginalized group may be. So we can, they don't vote they mainly don't vote for us anyway. So we can just kind of double down and move on this direction anyway. That's just my personal, belief. But I just kind of really want to wrap up my point on this whole me-centric group dynamic thing is this. I think at the end of the day, what people really have to ask themselves as an individual, because we all got to look at what energy that we put out in the universe and what energy that we receive back into the universe. And Donald Trump has to deal with it as well. It's going to come back one way or the other. It's going to come back and affect your family, come back and affect you health-wise. It's going to come back and affect you financially. It's going to come back and affect you one way or the other. You're not going to be able to just go out and put out negative energy or energy that is so proper, I should say, only benefits you only, or just your group only, and excludes everyone else, and be sustainable with that. That might work for 3 years, 4 years, maybe even 12 years, but eventually it's going to begin to take its toll. And it's going to come, it's karma of the universe is going to come back at you, and you're going to be forced to deal with some of that blowback. I mean, just quickly look at the Kennedys as an example. I mean, people can sit here and say the Kennedys was one of, if not the greatest American family as far as a king, if you want to make an analogy or a comparison to. But at the same time, just as royalty and success and privilege and political success has been attributed to the Kennedy's name, so has tragedy been attributed to the Kennedy's name as well. So they couldn't that. And so to me, I see that always going hand in hand. It's going to come back in one form or another. And that's why I think people really got to begin to look at themselves from their own spiritual growth. And that's why I believe that, again, echoing why it's so important to be on the journey of becoming more fully human. So you can learn from mistakes you made in the past, grow in the direction you're supposed to grow. That's a universal thing. We're all supposed to grow mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. We're supposed to grow, and emotionally. And if you don't grow, then what's going to happen is you're going to receive the consequences of stunning that growth. It's kind of like putting a child in a 4x5 box and say, well, you're not going to grow beyond this 5 inches because I put you in this box. Eventually, the natural universal growth is going to come against that box, and that's going to be consequences of having that child in that box where he can't normally grow naturally. And that, to me, is just anything we're dealing with is going to have those same consequences. So, but I believe we reached a part of the show now where we're talking enough of the issue, of the challenge, of the problem. And I know one thing we like to do on our show is not just talk about the problems, but also lead people to the direction of where they can find solutions. And so with that being said, what are some of the directions you want to put our listeners on this week as far as how they can move away from this, maybe harming them, and still be fully human, even within the group dynamic if possible?
Yeah, so usually these are questions that we can ask ourselves. So the question that I would offer folks is to explore your beliefs explore your the groups that you're attuned to, the groups to which you believe you belong, and then ask, to what extent is this group exclusive and tries to keep people out? And to what extent is it inclusive and it welcomes people in? And how do you feel about those inclusions and exclusions? In other words, it's almost like your own values assessment. How do I feel about keeping people out? How do I feel about welcoming people in? And then gradually expand that from whatever local groups you belong to, beginning with your family, maybe, or your friends, to work, to community, to religion, to nation, to whatever, and see what comes up for you. Are you more of an includer or an excluder? And how do you feel about that? And to see. You might get a surprise.
Excellent. Excellent advice. Now, in our last 4 minutes, we move into the section of our show where we both want to highlight or lift up someone who we believe has shown the characteristics of someone who's been fully human, whether they're past or currently still alive, exhibiting those fully human characteristics now. And I'll throw the mic your way, Reggie, and give you the opportunity to go first with who you believe, who's your choice today.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually go back to what I said earlier. I went to a book presentation at the Hudson Valley Books for Humanities in Austin, New York yesterday, to see a guy that I've known online for about 2 years, kind of like how you and I know each other. We've never met in person, but his name is Sean Harvey, and he wrote a book entitled Warrior Compassion. And his background, really briefly, is that he was really well educated, was on Wall Street, has taught at Cornell, at NYU, at Baruch College in New York. And then he got a calling to work with men. And I'm just going to give a snippet of this and just keep it really short. And he became an interfaith minister. And now his primary work, and what the book is about, he works with men primarily, but not only, in what he calls hypermasculine communities. So law enforcement, firefighters, military. He also works with men in other groups as well. But he's a really bright, compassionate, wise, skilled facilitator. He's really good at interacting with people. So I got to meet, again, Sean Garvey yesterday in person. We've had many conversations via Zoom over the last 2 years, but we actually got to hug each other yesterday, which was pretty cool. So Sean is my nominee for being fully human today.
Excellent. Well, one of these days I look forward, hopefully I can meet Sean, because he sounds, your introduction, your description of him sounds definitely like someone who's in line with a lot of things you and I talk about. Yeah. And you just said he's someone who exhibits a fully human characteristics. I definitely look forward to meeting him one day. And
he's in Philadelphia, just so you know. So he's closer to you than he is to me.
Okay. Excellent. Well, my choice is going to be a gentleman who I believe is someone who showed these characteristics. He's gotten up in age now, but he's someone who, to me, when I first found out about him, he's always shown this, despite his being a group-centric, and that's Noam Chomsky, who's an American professor and public intellectual known for his work in linguistics, political activism, and social criticism. He's a linguistic, known as a modern father of linguistics, but just listen to his, I would say, clear and unbiased perspective on foreign policy. Even though he's Jewish, he talks about the atrocities that Israel has done as far as the apartheid type structure systems they had on Palestine. He talks about what America has done from an evil capitalistic corporation perspective, and just always been fair and unbiased in my perspective, and always brought a lot of profound wisdom and intellectual, I would say, guidance to every discussion that he decides to give he opines about. So I would say I want to lift up Noam Chomsky. He's 94 years old right now. I want to make sure I lift him up before while he's still currently alive. I think he definitely deserves his flowers while he's alive, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we reached the hour. We definitely appreciate our listening audience who's either you're listening to us live, and we appreciate you for hanging in there with us, or you listen to us on the replay. Definitely appreciate that. Engage with us. Again, the purpose of our show is to align with other individuals who are discovering or want to discover how they can become more fully human. Definitely encourage you all to purchase Reggie's book, Healing America's Narratives. Really understand what healing is all about, why we need to be healing and getting over this tragedy and trauma that we're seeing on a daily basis in America that's filling our minds. And then finally, I want to thank you again, Reggie, for your energy that you bring, always ready and prepared for a great discussion every week. And again, thank you for writing the book. And until next Monday at 10 a.m., I wish everyone blessings, and I hope you take on the journey. And if not, I'm sorry, if you're already on it, continue down the journey of becoming more fully human. Thank you.